Welcome to JCT TV. This is Bible Study for the 21st Century. So friends, the last two programs, I've been introducing Brian Campbell to you, who is a key force behind this amazing thing called the Fire Bible, which I'll show you when I interview him. But I also have great regard and interest in him as a former pastor who pastored for 30 years, who raised 3 daughters in a pastoral context. His personal journey of faith as a first-generation pastor. Very interesting biographical stuff. And I'm going to get into that, this interview. It'll come in a minute.
JCT TV is the official voice of WOW, working for orphans and widows. Jim Cantelon is the founder of WOW and has been ministering to orphans and widows in distress for 18 years. WOW's focus is home-based care for the dying. The horizon is vast, with thousands of the least of these in Africa and India. WOW depends on your generous support. To do so, simply contact us by phone, mail, or online.
So friends, here's that Fire Bible I was telling you about at the top of the program. It has been produced in a number of languages. It's in scores of countries now around the world. It's so thick because it's full of very, very well-written, well-endorsed commentary. I suppose we here in North America would call it a study Bible, but it was produced for new leaders in various countries who had just come to faith and had not had the opportunity of going to seminary. And it's just a terrific work. And Brian Campbell is out there championing the Fire Bible all over the world. We've had some really good talks, Brian, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Over the last 2 interviews. I want to just shift gears even more. You pastored for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
You went into the pastorate. Why?
I've often asked that question to myself so many times. 30 years of it.
Yeah.
Well, a little bit of context, background. I'm first generation. We joke about your, multi-generational, background and experience. Well, I'm just the opposite. I'm first generation everything. I wasn't raised in the church. Yeah. Came to Christ at 17 in a very dramatic fashion. And about 6 months after I came to the Lord, I was actually called into ministry by the pastor's wife. She was praying, and the Lord spoke to her that I was going to be in ministry, which I thought was crazy. And so that kind of began the journey. So, it sure wasn't anything I've ever aspired to, but with just a clear sense of calling, and so just pursued what we felt like the Lord had for us.
Okay, I want to pursue that, but I want to step back for a minute. You mentioned you came to the Lord in a very dramatic fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the drama.
Yeah, so came from a broken home, and when I was probably 10, 11 years old, and had no idea the impact of that. But the side effect or the byproduct of it was, by the time I was probably 14, I was coming off the rails, and so got into the deep end of the drug culture and all that went with that, and so quit high school at 16. And though I had a very successful pharmaceutical career during that time.
Right. Okay. A drug habit, in other words.
Yeah. And but August 20th, 1976, was visiting my oldest brother, Dickinson, Texas, and he was serving as an associate pastor of an Assembly of God church. And I really got kind of tricked into going on that visit. But my mom, brother, sister, they had been praying for quite a long time. And in his living room, just talking, all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit showed up in that little trailer, and it was an encounter. It was, probably from the time I was 13, 14 years old till I got saved, the only emotion that I ever expressed was anger. So
it wasn't anger in this case. Yeah.
Still, yeah.
Yeah.
So I wasn't expecting that, but.
Now, how is it that your brother, who also came from this broken home, found himself in the ministry? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, these are some of the mysteries of the kingdom, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my mom, actually, as a result of the divorce and emotional problems, and she ended up in the hospital with a breakdown, and her brother, who was a founding member of an Assembly of God church in Kettering, Ohio, came to visit her. And she had a dramatic experience, gave her heart to Christ, baptized in the Holy Spirit, and started attending the Assembly of God church. So she began leading each one of her 6 children down that same path. And we all came to Christ at different times and in different ways. And so Dave, being the oldest, he was the first. So yeah.
Was there any history on the part of your mother or your father's family life that harkened back to some heritage of faith, or was this emergence as recently as your mom and you all?
Yeah, I think our family put fun in dysfunction. We're, and I only know the story secondhand, but apparently my grandmother was a godly woman, and my grandfather was an alcoholic. All of my mom's life, and miraculously came to Christ about some months before he died in his 80s. He gave his heart to the Lord. So there was the seed of that, because of the grandmother. I don't know how she came, how she was introduced to it, but especially through my cousin, uncle, their family kind of took it all the way. We were introduced to it later, but eventually all came into it. So first generation, yeah.
Now, as a pastor, you would have a greater capacity, perhaps, than I would, because my background is so different from yours, for the brokenness and the needs of the everyday person coming into your church.
Yeah.
You remember how it feels, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I think we all would, as pastors, preachers, I think we all preach and lead and from our context. And that was my context, and so, Paul said he was the chiefest of sinners, and we see what God did with that, and how brilliant his teaching on grace was, and is, because by grace we've been saved, not of works, lest any man should boast. So, yeah, I think that was a huge impact on my life during my pastoral years.
When you were in those first few years of pastoring, we've all been there at some point. We all have to start somewhere. Yeah. I had to start somewhere. Were there influential leaders, mentors, and not necessarily even professional clergymen, but an individual here and there who impacted your life positively and influenced the course of your ministry?
Absolutely. So when I got saved, of course, came home and started attending Cantelon Assembly of God, and the youth pastor, Terry Hoggard, Terry took me under his wing and immediately had that, for a lack of a better term, spiritual father. And I mean, he hands-on poured into my life and mentored, and Terry went on to pastor and then became a missionary, planted the International Church in Rome, and he and his wife, Ruth Ann, have been longtime missionaries, and to this day, very good friend. And I preached in his church there in Rome several times.
Wow.
He's no longer the pastor there, but to your point, yeah, very influential, but he was the first, most notably, yeah.
And then from time to time, pastors go through crises, just like their people do. Sometimes you wonder, am I on the right track? Have I lost my way? Because pastoring can be tough, right? I mean, there's a lot of pushback in pastoring.
Yeah.
You're fair game in many ways, and I don't mean to even introduce the victim talk, but the point is you're a leader, and often those who are led object,
right,
or don't approve, and can give you trouble, and especially if they're people of influence in the church with a lot of people that they influence in your congregation. It can be a real juggernaut. I mean, it can be really tough. Did you ever have to, during some of those moments, reach out to someone?
Oh, yeah.
And if you did, I don't need to know a name, but were there those available who would help you through those crises?
Of course. But I was, our generation, we were kind of pre-coaching, pre-mentors,
That's right,
all of that. And of course, we applaud that, we celebrate that, and wish we would have had more of that. But in our day, of pastoring, especially as a young pastor, you only got that because you sought it out, you know, and so I can look back and know at the times that I really needed somebody, they were there, it just wasn't organized, it just wasn't formalized, and I sought it out. Yeah, I have some spiritual mentors and spiritual fathers in my life that huge influence on me. Yeah.
Some of the issues that your congregants were facing 30 years ago would not necessarily take on the same form today. I mean, the basic human needs are the same, but it seems that life has become increasingly complicated for people. Big challenge to pastor churches today. Huge.
Now, again, for 30 years, I was in the church I was pastoring at the time. I was there 48 Sundays out of the year. I'm in the same place. So I only knew it from that context. Now, for the last 3 years, traveling domestically, almost every weekend, internationally 6 times a year. But the point of that is now, I get to see all the different contexts, but there are common denominators. And it's, in my opinion, it's more challenging for pastors' wives, pastors' families, than it's ever been. It's a different world.
And I don't think we're far enough away from it yet in terms of an historical perspective to understand the impact that social media is having in people's lives. We're too close to it yet.
Yeah.
But this is a dynamic that pastors have never faced in history that they're facing now.
Right. Well, and so when you're saying that, here's my knee jerk. Whereas for me, it was before email.
Yeah.
If we can imagine that.
Yeah.
It was getting a phone call or a letter.
Yeah.
A couple days after. Yeah. Or the phone call on Monday or Tuesday or the occasional Sunday afternoon. I remember those. Yeah. And then the advent of email, and then but with social media, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and these sort of things, the feedback is immediate. Yeah. Pastors do not have time to sit back. They're getting immediate responses,
and what's really scary, a pastor can be preaching a sermon and somebody tweaks and they go on the internet while they're listening to you and find your sermon there.
Exactly.
Thinking, he's plagiarizing. That's happened.
Yep.
That's happened.
Yep.
We'll talk more about these things next interview. I'll be back right after this break.
Jim Cantelon Today is a program dedicated to the teaching of the good news of Jesus Christ. This all through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. JCT also brings to you encouraging testimonies and stories from Christian leaders all over the globe. If this program has added value to your life, would you please consider becoming a partner? To do so, simply contact us by phone, mail, or online.
We're in Mark chapter 5, and last program, we were just beginning with verse 21. Jesus and the disciples had come back across the lake from the eastern side where they had that encounter with the Gadarene demoniac, and they're back now on the northwestern shore, Capernaum. People meet him on the shore. That very crowd he was escaping are there again. And I hope Jesus' batteries have been recharged somewhat, and he's going to enter into ministry for sure, because one of the prominent leaders in the synagogue was in that crowd. His name was Jairus. And this, we'll pick it up in verse 22 here. One of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, came to him. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." And I pointed out last time that he was, in contemporary synagogue terms, he's probably the president of the synagogue. Well known to Jesus. Jesus went to the synagogue every Shabbat when he was in Capernaum. So he and Jairus are very well acquainted, and both Jairus and the crowd were very well acquainted with Jesus' remarkable healing ministry. They hadn't seen him raising the dead much, but here Jairus is saying, "My little girl is so sick, she's dying. She may be dead already. Please come and lay your hands on her and heal her." So Jesus, without any comment, he just goes with him. We read, he went with him, verse 24. I like that. He just went with him. Okay, he just cut to the chase. Just let's get to it. And this great multitude followed him and thronged him. I've stressed this a few times. We're not talking, 15, 20 people here. We're talking hundreds, sometimes thousands of people who thronged Jesus, to the point where on one occasion they were trampling one another. There were so many. They were in their tens of thousands in one setting. So he's absolutely surrounded by people. He's being jostled big time. And in this crowd is a certain woman, and she's not named. She had a flow of blood for 12 years. Now, Mark doesn't describe what it was. He just says she had this flow of blood. I can only speculate, and I'm not going to speculate, other than to say sometimes, childbirth can really do a number on women, and she may have had what's called a fistula, which was just a suppurating, unending, trickle of blood. We don't know what it was. It could have been some other kind of issue, but the point is, it was such an issue for her that she had spent all she had on doctors, and they hadn't helped her. And she was no better, no better, but grew worse. So she has this thought that if I can just touch his garment, and I think the King James Version puts the hem of his garment, I'll get better, all right? So that's what she did. She managed to shoulder her way through the crowd, and she touched Jesus. And as soon as she did so, the fountain of her blood, Mark says, was dried up. She felt in her body she was healed, and she was. Now, this isn't referenced anywhere else. And, I love it, the fact that there's no predictability to the way Jesus ministered. In this case, he felt power had gone out of him. Now, this may have been the case every time he healed, but it's not mentioned. Mark mentions it here. And remember, Mark is basically writing down what Peter, the apostle, remembered. Okay? Mark essentially is Peter's voice as he writes. Jesus turns around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" Now, you can understand the disciples saying, "What? This is a multitude thronging you here, and you say, 'Who touched me?' Come on, Jesus, He doesn't even respond to the disciples. Time and again, the disciples were as obtuse and as stiff-necked as you and I are. I mean, they were too opinionated by half. I'll speak for myself, I'm that way too. Too opinionated by half. But the woman, fearing and trembling, Mark says, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." Interestingly, it's her faith that has healed her. He doesn't say, "I have healed you." It's your faith that has healed you. Which, again, I don't know how this works. But Jesus is telling us something here. There is a very strong case, not just here, but again and again in Scripture, for the remarkable catalytic influence of faith in our lives. Faith is something that beggars description. It's a leap in the dark, believing that underneath are the everlasting arms, you're not going to fall into the abyss. Faith is taking a risk. Faith is to all intents and purposes, the antithesis of choosing security, in the sense of, my money, my possessions, my culture, they'll protect me, they'll support me, they'll sustain me. Faith transcends all of that, and it's an action based on belief. Because I believe, I act this way. I cannot explain or rationalize my action apart from my belief. So if I believe God exists, I act in a certain way. If I believe that He will care for me, I act in a certain way. If I don't believe that, then I don't act in that certain way. Faith is action predicated on belief. And in most cases, we need to understand that faith appears to be blind. In one place, Paul will say, we walk by faith and not by sight. If you're walking by sight, it's not faith. And yet, faith, if you will, sees with the eyes of the heart, or the eyes of the spirit, the eyes of the soul. Okay. So anyhow, it's the faith that has made her whole, and there's no further dialogue. Simply go in peace, be healed of your affliction. Man, oh man, when Jesus, the Son of God, says that to you, you know it's done. While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, is from Jairus' house. Remember, they're on their way to Jairus' daughter, who is sick and dying. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why trouble the teacher any further? Whoa. Jairus' heart must have sunk. Mark doesn't say. But as soon as Jesus hears this, he says to Jairus, do not be afraid, only believe. Okay? Do not be afraid, only believe. The very thing that he had just told the woman had healed her is the very thing he's saying to Jairus now. Belief. On the basis of your belief, act. Act. Believe that she's okay. He then says to this huge crowd, you guys stay back. And he just takes Peter, James, and John, the big three, or the three as they're often called with a capital T, with Jairus, and goes into the house. As he's going in, there's a huge crowd already gathered who are mourning and wailing. Believe me, I've lived in the Middle East. I lived in Israel for 7 years. I also work, as you know, for the last 20 years in Africa. And I have seen weeping on a grand scale. I have seen mourning, especially in Africa, with so many young people, especially children and orphans and widows dying of HIV and AIDS. I've gone to those funerals. I've seen those overloaded cemeteries. I have been surrounded by people who are wailing like their hearts are broken, and they don't hold back. It is full of sound, sorrowful sound. This is what's happening around Jairus' house. Jesus walks through that crowd with Jairus, Peter, James, and John into the house and upstairs to the daughter. And he says to the people as he's going in, why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead but sleeping. And they had time in their mourning and weeping to ridicule Jesus, to mock him. What? We know she's dead. We've been in there. She's not breathing. Who's this guy? This time he's overstepped himself. Well, next time we'll pick it up and we'll see what happened. I wish I could do it now, but our time is gone. Remember Cantelon's Casual Commentary. You can read much more than I'm able to cover on the program. Ask for your copy. I'll be back right after this.
The Bible tells us that true religion is visiting orphans and widows in their distress. The Bible also says that God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. Heaven's core values for mankind begin with God's heart for the least of these. When you support WOW, you're in the sweet spot of God's heart for the poor. Yes, we're only a small player in this great drama, but at least we're on the field. Please give generously.
Friends, I just want to say something to you, the viewer. We have just added 15 new stations in the state of New Mexico, and I want to greet all of you who are watching. Maybe some of you remember my Talk to Me show that used to run on your station a decade or so ago in the middle of the night. But I'm just delighted that you're watching, and I'm very honored to be a part of your world. But we're also on the National Religious Broadcasters channel every Sunday night, 8 o'clock Central, across America on DirecTV, and then we're all across Canada at 7 o'clock on Sunday nights on the Vision National Network. And then we're, of course, available on the internet whenever you want, your smartphone. We're trying our best to let our light shine, get the gospel out to you. Remember, friends, that this is a very low-key ministry, Bible-focused, and caring for orphans and widows that's supported by people like you. We need your support. Thank you for helping us. See you next time.